Like, bro, no offense, but if you think that, then you're either just completely oblivious to what the point of that scene was, or you just had to have just been not paying attention.
I'm so excited for this.
Oh boy, well then, I guess we're here with another debunk video. Yesterday I saw a few videos about how the latest episode of The Boys was apparently like super disrespectful.
Hey, that's me.
Like, bro, no offense, but if you think that, then you're either just completely oblivious to what the point of that scene was, or you just had to have just been not paying attention.
We'll see if I'm oblivious or if I wasn't paying attention, because apparently those are the only two options here. I am so excited.
Here that I'm gonna kind of use as an example of what I'm talking about. Let's get into it.
I watched The Boys, the new episode. That's me. That's me. It's insane to me that in 2024 we can have an entire episode dedicated to the sexual discomfort of a man and it seemingly be played for laughs.
The sexual assault of Hughie wasn't played for laughs. I'm sorry.
Okay. I mean, we just have Eric Kripke like on like in an interview, like saying it was supposed to be hilarious. I mean, I showed the okay, it's fine.
All right, but did we watch the same episode?
Hughie, what else did she do to you?
People seem to think that it was, but it's really just misunderstanding where the comedy of the situation actually is. There was a comedic undertone at first, which that was kind of the point. It was heavily implied that Tech Knight and Webweaver had messed around in this fashion before, due to Webweaver having a safe word. You know, keep in mind, Hughie agreed to these acts, which were mainly just exploring these guys' weird-ass kinks.
What this guy just said, I think puts me, and we're gonna go back to the video, don't worry, puts into context how much I think he doesn't even understand about sexual situations and consent, because he just said that Hughie agreed to be put into this, and there are a lot of people who don't understand the idea of coercion in the world of kind of like sexual exploration and sexual acts, because a lot of people think that if you say yes or if you agree to, yes, Carlos, you failed me, specifically just you, but if you agree to do something with like verbally and you say yes, then that's like an actual agreement. The reason that I think this is ridiculous, and if you think about it, falls apart under like any scrutiny, is because we can actually apply it to like the idea of like manipulation, especially as a therapist. Since I have a master's degree in therapy and I've worked with clients, I have been trained in social engineering in all sorts of different ways to evoke things out of clients, to get them to admit things, to get them to confide. And as a therapist, what you do is you're meant to treat these people with unconditional positive regard and always have their best interest at heart, because you do effectively walk into their most vulnerable moments with them. And now, once they divulge those things to you, you have like a ton of power over them. And you were trained to be able to get them to talk about those things. And so the idea of like, okay, if as a clinician, I now have power over them and I can manipulate them possibly because of this power that I have over them and because of what they've done to me, as far as like, or what they've opened up to me and allowed me to learn. Now, if I do something to them where I effectively say, you have to pay me this much more, or you have to tell me this other thing, or you have to do X, Y, or Z, or else I either won't help you or I'll do something else, and the person says yes, they would have been coerced into that, right? So they're not wanting to say yes, but their idea is, if I don't say yes, the alternative of me not doing this is worse than if I did do it in my mind. And that's still coercion. That's not good. If a therapist ever coerces you guys, that is, I mean, if anyone in any real way tries to coerce you by basically saying like, oh, well, you should really think about doing this. They're manipulating you, and that's bad. What this guy is basically saying is that like Hughie agreed to do all these things, but he didn't really agree to do it. He didn't know that these things were happening. He was coerced. And sure, he might have said, yeah, I'll use the safe word, I'll do these things, but he didn't consent to these things being done to him. And you can obviously see that he's not consenting, because there's a point in the video and just the episode where he's trying to guess the safe word and he's failing. Like, he's literally attempting to cancel out the acts that are happening. He just can't do it. And the reason that he doesn't reveal his identity is because he thinks he's going to die. It's not that Hughie agrees to all this stuff. He was coerced into it and then couldn't get out of the situation without incurring like massive bodily harm. That I think is like another, just right off the bat, something that this guy might not understand about the situation at large.
Because he was trying to get information out of them. That was what the writers were making humor out of, and it led to some genuinely funny moments.
What? Oh, sorry. He just test this shit out. He test this shit out trying to see what the safe word is.
And this works because Ashley and Tech Knight genuinely think it's actually Web Weaver under there. They think he's enjoying it. As the audience, however, know that Hughie isn't enjoying it. That's the irony of it.
This is weird to me because I think his argument is because people laugh at it, it's not only funny, it was executed well and is permissible, right? And so I'll be honest, I am a person who thinks that essentially anything in writing can be done if you're good enough at writing. Like literally anything. My favorite example to give is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the actual plot line. And sorry for spoilers for a show that's like almost as old as me. The villain wants to eat the sun so that he can become God and then rule over the world by subverting the laws of alchemy and then fusing with like eternity. And that sounds ridiculous. But if you actually watch the show, you know, it's one of the best anime ever. So I think anything is possible in writing as long as you execute it. Just take his video down for copyright infringement. I'm not gonna take his video down. It's not that big a deal. He can make like videos about me. I don't care. This is, you know, this is what YouTube is about. This is discourse. I don't think he's like trying to attack me personally. So the idea that, oh, okay, like anything technically can be done. And I think anything can be comedic. Louis CK has some horrifically bad jokes, like as far as like content wise, that are genuinely funny. So yeah, like showing people laughing at Hughie's misfortune. I've never said that the scene itself wasn't like funny to some people. I'm sure some people laughed. My argument was that the scene was in bad taste. The depiction of Hughie being assaulted in the way he was uncomfortable to a very large group of people. And I think those are the people who were forgotten during the writing or possibly misunderstood during the writing. And the logic here that I always follow is that just because some people laugh at something doesn't make that thing socially permissible. There are tons of people who back in the day would laugh at like, I don't know, people getting like beaten up by the police or people getting like hound dogs sicked on them in the street because they didn't think that the suffering of criminals or, you know, black people, there's tons of like slave owners back in the day who probably laughed at a bunch of stuff. But obviously now we can recognize the logic of like, just because someone laughs at it doesn't make it an actual funny thing. There's tons of reasons why people laugh at things.
Genuinely think it's actually Web Weaver under there. They think he's enjoying it. As the audience, however.
Also, I don't know if this guy just like 100% missed huge parts of the episode, but Tech Knight almost certainly knows this is not Hughie. There's a few things if you watch the episode where they're kind of blatant of Tech Knight knowing. He like rubs the glass a little bit. Hughie doesn't react to it. And Tech Knight's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Because soups a lot of the time will have like enhanced hearing. But the biggest thing is that when Tech Knight walks Hughie into his dungeon, there's a hole in the back of the web weaver suit, and Hughie obviously doesn't have a spider hole. And Tech Knight, the whole reason that he wants to bring web weaver and down into the sex dungeon is because he has a hole, because Tech Knight is obsessed with holes. Hughie does not have the hole in his back to shoot webs, and you can very clearly see that before Tech Knight takes him down into the dungeon. So Tech Knight knows from the beginning, before he ever steps foot in the dungeon, that that's not Hughie. And so he is torturing him purposely, because Tech Knight's also supposed to be one of the smartest characters in the show. So yeah, he knows it's not Hughie. To me, like the cake sitting, okay, that was a little funny because like it's so ridiculous, right? Like that's so over the top that, you know, that's a bit funny. The idea that this is a man not enjoying sex and that's the joke is really, really anti-man. If we really want to be honest, the comedy of the situation of men being taken advantage of, the assumption is that men are always supposed to enjoy sex. It's like supposed to be kind of like this universal human thing. So a man being put in a situation where the sex is so strange that he's not enjoying himself, that's the weird thing. That's the thing that's like supposed to be funny and, you know, like totally strange. I think it's just it's like a played out trope that so many, I think, fictions don't bother to interrogate realistically. And that's what my original video was about.
Even with this situation, as it's occurring, it gets more and more uncomfortable to the point where it's no longer a joke. Tech Knight discovers that he's an imposter, actually tries to SA Hughie now that he knows it's him, and he knows that Hughie is obviously uncomfortable with this whole thing. Now he's forcing himself onto him despite Hughie pleading for his fucking life.
This is weird. His response here is weird because Hughie has always been pleading. So I don't know why now for us this would be any more serious, just because Hughie's identity was revealed to Tech Knight. Why for an audience this would be any less funny from his logic now that Tech Knight knows, because Hughie obviously doesn't want to do this. So like I don't necessarily get it.
Telling him not to.
Wait a minute. Okay, you don't want to do this. Hey, you were my favorite hero as a kid.
And then fuck them.
No!
See that? Notice how the tone shifts from how it was earlier. Now that Hughie is actually being violated, it's now being taken seriously and it's not a joke anymore. No corny joke.
But why was it a joke in the first place? That's the thing that I'm not getting. Again, I understand the truly ridiculous, like the cake sitting, or maybe there was some other stuff, but what was the joke? What was the joke beforehand? Was it, again, just like man is tied down and not enjoying girl piss slathered on him? I don't know.
Here, there's no, you know, funny kink here. Like, it's genuinely a scary atmosphere at that point. Straight up horrifying. Like, it's not like they said, oh, you know, let's put Hughie in this extremely uncomfortable situation for fun. Ha 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 ha. Like, no.
Also, they did say that. Eric Kripke did say that, unfortunately. He very much did say that.
Oh, they know how fucked up the situation is at its core. The fact that you're acknowledging that parts of the scene made you uncomfortable means that the scene did its job. Yes, it had some comedic moments at the beginning, but the overall situation was terrifying.
There's a channel called Pop Culture Detective, which hopefully a bunch of you know. And it has a 2-part video series with millions and millions of well-deserved views, titled The Sexual Assault of Men Played for Laughs. And it goes through and depicts years, if not decades, of sexual violence against men being used as comedy rather than an exploration of the type of sexual violence that men can experience and their reactions towards it.
Because Hughie was completely fine and unscathed after this situation emotionally.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I mean, we could just listen to what I said, right?
I miss him, Annie. I miss my dad.
I'm so sorry. It's okay.
To mention, they might even...
So real quick, they definitely showed Hughie breaking down about his dad, and presumably about the horrible trauma that he just, got into from the violence. But my whole, I think, reason I said they didn't explore the real reactions to sexual violence is because that moment with Hughie was all we ever got. In tons of stories and fictions, they'll do that. They'll have like a single moment of reflection by the character to show that they were not having a good time. And then that'll be it, right? Like that'll be the extent of how a man reacts to like sexual violence. And the reason we could just very easily see how this isn't a genuine exploration is, again, to compare it to explorations of violence committed against women. Women in stories will have sexual violence done to them, and their entire plot lines will from that point on, if not, will be directly about the sexual violence, will be largely overshadowed by what happened to them. And they'll be changed in many cases because of the sexual violence, or at least the threat of sexual violence, right? And I think that's what I mean with Hughie, is that sure, he cried about his dad and then being assaulted, but the rest of the season never took another look at what it would actually be like for a person to believe 100% and to be trapped down and think that they were going to have a hole cut in them. This is, honestly, I thought the essay was just a joke because it seems to be the norm. It wasn't okay till I saw your video how messed up it was. I'm speaking as an essay. I'm speaking as an essay child. I didn't see it that way. Oh yeah, I'm not even saying that like it doesn't come off, because I'm to a large group of people, I'm sure that the nuances that exist within the scene would have made them think that it was just a funny scene. And I know that because the whole like production team thought that it was funny, that they'd let it go through. Our perceptions of sexual violence that happen to men are so skewed just as a society that a lot of times we don't even recognize bad depictions that are being made, even if we are making them or watching them. I'm not even blaming a lot of people, I think, explicitly about like laughing at it or not finding it seriously. A lot of what I was talking about was simply just being disappointed at the people who make the show seemingly having a really, really good handle on female sexual violence, having that same kind of handle on like male sexual violence.
Even explore the aftermath of how it impacted Hughie mentally in the coming episodes. And here's the thing, I'm not even denying the fact that there are distasteful scenes that do the type of thing that he's talking about, but this isn't one of them.
In the very first season of the show, Starlight had to go through a terrible, terrible experience of non-consensual sex to be able to join the Seven. And the creators of the show realized that they had to do that correctly. And they had to do that with respect to the character.
Both executed correctly, but they each had a different purpose behind it. So the purpose of what happened with Starlight in the Deep was to essentially show how screwed up the Seven was behind closed doors. Like the whole point was to show like these are not real superheroes, like they are messed up people. That was the whole point of the whole Starlight in the Deep scene. They used that to develop her character over time, something that you aren't allowing the writers to do by jumping the gun with what happened to Hughie. The whole point of what Hughie experienced was to essentially bring him to a breaking point, right?
Okay, so this is like another thing, and this is a trope that I think a lot of writers don't even realize that they do. This can be done well. It's incredibly hard to do well. Using sexual violence to bring a character to a breaking point, to simply have them try to like improve, is really, really tricky and loaded. Because essentially, what you're doing is saying that you can turn sexual violence into a benefit. Now, again, there are ways to write this out in a story that is genuinely still responsible and healthy. Because there are people who go through sexual violence and end up forming traits and qualities and all that, that put them in a better position personally than who they were before. But in no way will these people who have survived sexual violence say that they also don't carry like trauma or some type of like carryover that they wish they didn't have. A lot of these traits that people who survive and end up becoming advocates and really powerful speakers and people who help others, they will be very vocal in being like, oh yeah, I still wish this never happened to me. I still wish, you know, like my life didn't take this route. And that's something that a lot of writers forget to put in, because a lot of writers will genuinely just have a character, like Sans is an idea, just like experience sexual violence to break them down and then be like, oh, look how much better they get after. And then again, there won't be like a truly genuine exploration of the trauma that they carry or their ideas about the experience. And it perpetuates the idea, especially if we do it with men, that there aren't serious negative mental repercussions that are long lasting, right? It's very actually similar. If we want to step away from like the sexual aspect, it's very similar, I would say, to how underrepresented like concussions are, like getting knocked out or like, you know, being unconscious in like action movies are. Because you see people get knocked out in like, you know, whether it's video games, movies or whatnot, and they, you know, like maybe they'll wake up later or they'll have like a headache. If you get knocked out in real life, that could like screw you up forever. And it's like really bad. But of course, because we don't see those things depicted like that, our perception of like getting knocked out or going unconscious is skewed. And I think we would think that if we saw someone in real life getting knocked unconscious, maybe that's not that bad of a thing. I think we have a similar thing happening if we depict sexual violence and then overcoming it as not having like actual serious long-term effects. The difference though is that like getting knocked out, I would say, doesn't have like kind of like the emotional and relationship repercussions as being sexually assaulted does.
Situation gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Of course, you had all of that on top of what happened with his dad. It's like the point was to break him. It goes from being composed to being genuinely terrified.
The other reason that I know, obviously, that this isn't kind of like, it doesn't really have any merit, is because if you watch the rest of the season of The Boys, Hughie's not any more broken afterwards than he was before. I don't think the writers are trying to use this to break him down to like build him up again. And the funny thing is, I am a little bit, I'm going to pull the card here. I'm a tiny bit of an expert on breaking characters down to build them up, because there is a video that I did and you'll notice that it's all about destruction and rebirth, in, you know, how they did that for Homelander. And Homelander is an example of a character who was definitely broken down and is being broken down to be, you know, actually, I guess he's on his rebirth phase right now. But I don't think this is necessarily what happened to Hughie, because Hughie didn't go through like a real transformation. And again, or any real exploration of what happened to his character and how he then needs to move forward from it, right? The Hughie pre-SA, to me, and from what I've seen, is not that much different than Hughie post-SA. And I think that's like the true marker of what I meant by like a serious exploration. I don't see him being that much different than what happened. So I don't see that this was the writers using it to break him down, because he wasn't broken down and he wasn't rebuilt any differently. He was kind of the same.
And at the end, he breaks down to Annie saying, hey, like, I'm not fine. I'm not fine.
I think they were correct in that. But what happened to Hughie here, by admission of the creators themselves, was played up for laughs. It wasn't done in any way that I think was supposed to give us an insight into how a person in this situation would genuinely feel.
If you look at the question being presented and how he answers it, very clear that what he's calling hilarious is their take on Batman, not necessarily what happened to Hughie. Like, you see...
Hold on. In a new interview with Variety shared following the release of The Boys Season 4 6th episode, the showrunner was asked about the decision to kick Hughie when he's down by having him sexually assaulted by his childhood hero after his dad just died. I don't know. Okay, so I think in my head two options here. I think the best case option, like the best scenario, is that this guy is completely oblivious to this and just like didn't read this maybe, or he was mistaken and thinks and thinks this is like not applicable, or he's lying. I'm not going to say he's lying because I don't know this dude. I'm sure he's a fine, cool dude who makes videos on YouTube. So I'm not going to say he's lying. So I think maybe he just like misremembered this to the point of making like a horrible mistake. But very clearly, it says right here, the showrunner was asked about the decision to kick Hughie when he's down by having him sexually assaulted by his childhood hero. Kripke replied, "Well, that's a dark way to look at it. We view it as hilarious." And then he starts talking about Tech Knight. Obviously, Tech Knight is our version of Batman. We wanted to really play around with the trope, Batman being a fascist, yada yada. And so he's not like denying that Hughie was assaulted. I guess he's denying it insofar as he thinks that the assault was funny. And he's like, I wouldn't be kicking him while he's down. But even here, we can see that the person who watched the video said that, or I'm sorry, the person who was writing this article and was doing the interview interpreted as sexual assault. Like, this isn't just me. Like, this is when asked the question, this is the question. The interviewer thought it was SA, and Kripke responded, "Well, that's a dark way to look at it. We viewed it as hilarious." And again, this is the basis for all of my criticism. I probably wouldn't have even made a video if I didn't know about this, because intent goes so long, I think, with me in understanding art. Kripke was blatant in that he saw the entirety of the situation as hilarious. And the reason I know he did is because if he saw it as two different parts, because that's what this guy argues essentially, which I think on the surface may be a valid argument, is that there's two halves of the Hughie scene, and one half is the funny part at the beginning that's supposed to be like kind of like lighthearted, and then the other half is the not funny part, in that this guy is being genuinely assaulted and we're not supposed to find that funny. It's supposed to be disturbing. It's supposed to be a shift. But that's it. I think my entire argument is that the whole thing was SA, and maybe sure the cake, if you wanted to laugh at it, the cake sitting was funny, but it was still just the joke being, look at this guy being SA. And I think that's what we'd see here in this quote. "You're being kind and courteous for this live stream. YouTube needs more of this." I don't want to come after this guy because I don't think he's a bad person. He just literally just skips over like, well, that's a dark way to look at it. We viewed it as hilarious. This is like the next part. It's interesting that he framed it this way too, but to not have the question when specifically talking about the guy answering the question, he doesn't put the question in view, so we like can't see what the question is. So like this response becomes a bit out of context. This to me is like a weird way of going about this if you were trying to like fact check me.
You see, the interview, and he's talking about how the idea of Batman having a sex dungeon would be hilarious, and it would kind of.
Again, this is weird to me because like, why is that hilarious? I guess it would be funny again if it was like all consensual, maybe. But like even then, like I guess the joke would be because Bruce Wayne is so guarded in vanilla that a representation of Batman being in a sex dungeon would be really funny because it's like a crazy interpretation of Batman. But I don't know, man, like Bruce Wayne laid pipe like it. Didn't Bruce Wayne have like multiple kids? Like Bruce Wayne, he wasn't like a prude or like a Puritan. Bruce Wayne had sex. He probably does have a sex dungeon. And the funny thing wasn't supposed to be just the sex dungeon. It was the whole like fascist thing. Like, he's like, oh yeah, the commentary, which I agree with, I think is that, you know, in some depictions of Batman, he just beats up poor people and doesn't actually like help the system. He's just like a rich billionaire dude who gets his kicks, you know, beating people who robbed like $1,000 worth from a store rather than going after like corrupt politicians. Again, there's other versions of Batman that do actually have this happen, but this was the main critique of the most recent Batman movie, The Batman. That was like the real thing Eric Kripke, I think, was talking about as far as wanting to make a commentary on, which I think was interesting. But that was completely different than him saying, oh yeah, I find the essay funny, because he literally says, oh, that's a dark way to interpret it.
It makes sense realistically. Which, I mean, that's kind of true, to be honest. I mean, think about it. I'm gonna give you a loose description of the Batcave. Batcave is a heavily secluded space with gadgets, toys, and trinkets everywhere, and also a place that is private and very few people have access to do things that they can only do in secret. You know what this description also loosely applies to realistically? A sex dungeon.
Again, here, I'm not even thinking he's wrong here. I think depicting Batman as having a sex dungeon, if you're gonna do like, you know, a bizarro world, could be funny depending on how it's executed. But what I don't find funny is the idea of like Batman, again, sexually assaulting somebody. that would be not funny to me, because sexual assault by itself is not funny. This man is a master of allegorical literature. Right? Again, there are plenty of ways to be able to make comedy out of things that would be traumatic to people, to create, you know, laughs for people, because laughter heals. Being able to include dark things in fiction allows us to, I think, go through it in a guided way that's safe for us, that where we can even reflect on ourselves and the trauma that we've experienced it and see it in a different way. But it can't just be a depiction of the trauma for the sake of depicting the trauma. And that's what I feel a lot of Hughie was. So like, again, if Batman had a sex dungeon to be sexually violent to either criminals or other people, that's not, to me, I don't see where the joke is in that. That's not funny to me. I don't see where the comedy. Some people might, but again, I would see that as an irresponsible use of comedy to make people desensitized and not take seriously the idea that simply just assaulting someone in a sex dungeon is not comedy in and of itself. I think it could have been funny if the joke was Hughie thinking it was something akin to the Batcave and then it's a sex dungeon. Yeah, right. So like the idea of like Hughie thinking he's going into this super cool area and then it's just a sex dungeon. I think that would be hilarious, right? Like he hears maybe all this stuff about Tech Knight's super secret Batcave, and then the Batcave is just a sex dungeon. I'm laughing at that right now, but I think the assault isn't what's funny. That's not like the funny part. That's not the comedy.
Like it's not that hard to put two and two together. Also, the idea that someone like Bruce, who regularly jails people in Arkham, but also try to find a way to profit off of it, it's not really far off either.
No, he has a point here. It is not, I think, far off if you have a very cynical view of Batman, that he might find a way to also, you know, gain money through the incarceration of people, right? If you're thinking about like how a Tech Knight would be like, oh, supposed to be taking Batman and twisting it into its worst possible way. I think that actually goes along with, you know, criticisms that someone could have of Batman. I do think that is fundamentally different than like a sex dungeon where you assault people.
With the multiple shots that this show takes at capitalism, I phrased it a little bit better and addressed Hughie directly. I mean, yeah, he could, but the question was pretty layered and multifaceted, and besides, it wasn't really needed. To mention, bro, if you think this is bad, wait till you see how fucked up the comic is. Where Black Noir strike.
Again, like this is such a strange thing to say, because effectively here the logic is, if you think, oh no, I mean really the logic is, this isn't bad because there's worse things that happen in another piece of fiction that's related to this. Unless there's like another way to interpret what he just said. I shudder to think if his logic is there are worse things that happen, so we shouldn't take this not as bad thing happening. Like, I don't know how to necessarily argue against that. I also addressed this in my video that like, there are worse, not worse, but like more over the top ridiculous things that happen. Like, again, we saw in the last episode, there's like a freaking 9-foot long dick that strangles people in the show. There's like a ball sack, I'm pretty sure, in like Gen V, or like a whole dick and balls that like crushes someone. I don't necessarily see the validity in the argument of, I'm surprised you're offended or caught off guard or feeling uncomfortable because this other worse thing exists. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this thing.
Right up Hughie, and it's just brushed off and snickered at upon by Butcher and his team. They're here.
Yeah, that's bad. Bro literally just said that trauma isn't as valid because someone else has gone through it worse. Yeah, like this guy just talked about like Hughie just like straight up getting essayed and them laughing about it in the comics. I hope he is thinking that that's like really bad and like that's not funny and like we shouldn't be okay with that if there's not going to be, again, a serious exploration of those types of things. And I think, again, really this may come down to this guy may not be a writer and doesn't understand the things about sensitivity or being a like representing certain things, but I think to make an entire video dedicated to it is pretty funny.
Here, not only is the situation much more mild in comparison, they actually have Hughie confide in Annie about how traumatizing it was to him.
This episode specifically felt like we need a character to struggle and we need the audience to feel uncomfortable. And therefore, we're going to use sex to do it. But not only are we going to use sex to do it, we want the audience to feel shocked. And therefore, we're going to put this character in a position of just being kind of like a patsy for 40 minutes.
Oh, this is a little something called intention behind the writing.
Again, I'm not going to condescend to him because I don't know. Maybe this guy is a writer. You know what? Maybe I've made some presumptions and I will apologize for that.
It's uncomfortable, which they did. Wanted it to be shocking.
Also, again, like that's not, if he thinks this was a genuine exploration, a guy just like crying for 30 seconds into the arms of his girlfriend about his dad dying and him being essayed. If he believes that that is a genuine exploration of how a person would react to essay, then I don't think he has looked into the actual reactions and the genuine nature of a person dealing with sexual assault. I don't think he knows how it is in real life, and therefore he doesn't know what to kind of like look to pick up on in fiction. Because again, I will tell you, as someone who's worked with people who have gone through sexual trauma of various different degrees, I was a therapist and worked with kids who were sexually assaulted. It is not something that you cry about for like 30 seconds and then get over. And if there's an argument that Hughie did his crying off screen, I still think that's a bit irresponsible by the creators to, if it did happen off screen, not to address it.
Which they did. From my understanding, again, this doesn't really prove anything other than the fact that the scene did what it was supposed to do.
Like
if the scene was supposed to make me feel uncomfortable, then why did he say it was supposed to be played for comedy? To me, those are a bit kind of like mutually exclusive. I don't necessarily know. Sure, there's certain ways of like doing comedy, and what a great freeze frame here. There's certain ways of doing comedy that do make you uncomfortable, but there's a certain type of discomfort that comes from watching someone be sexually assaulted that I don't think necessarily lends itself to comedy. And that's what I think the nuance here is, that like the comedy that they're thinking that they're doing and the situation that they're depicting don't match. Just from the other things this guy has said, he obviously has no idea what he's talking about. I spent too much money in college in a research-oriented field to just say stuff. So I generally try to have like my, I's dotted and my T's crossed and have all my receipts. So it is a bit weird that everything this guy has pulled up seems to not be correct, but more power to him.
Go back and watch that episode. It seemed like there were tons of other ways that this type of like infiltration, almost like heist mission could have gone down. And at the first chance, they jumped at the ability, or I should say the opportunity, to turn Hughie into a sex slave.
Not really, because the only way they were getting that information was from Tech Knight directly. Had to be very careful even with that, because Homelander was there, which was why Hughie needed a disguise. He didn't even wash the uniform on the off chance that they needed the scent to protect them from Homelander.
So this is, again, I know at this point I kind of understand what we're working with here. But the idea of this guy, I think, genuinely saying there was no other way for them to progress the story. They had to have Hughie be assaulted. I gotta go. I can't stand listening to this man talk, but more power to you. But yeah, like the idea of there being no other way is insane. Like, you're a writer, you're God. You can do anything that you want to do. You don't have to have Hughie do this. There's multiple other like ways having the story progress. It just comes down to your creativity. And I think to me, that's a bit inarguable. Like, they didn't have to do this. It just seemed like this was the easiest thing. Like, again, just very recently in the season, a scene which, you know, is kind of weird, but like a dude who can make clones of himself, like jacking himself off and tossing his own salad. It's like, okay, it just seemed like they needed shock value. When they need shock value, they go to sex. Cannon fodder is sleeping with less brain damage than we will. Yeah.
If the tables were turned, and I hate using this argument because most of the time it's not really true, but if the tables were turned, and if this were a woman in this position, I think it would be much more evident and clear why this situation was so bad.
They made it evident and clear both times, my guy.
Eric Kripke, I'm pretty sure, has just...
Well, I don't know. I keep getting whiplash because like he will say that it's funny and was supposed to be used for comedy, but then in the same breath also say that it wasn't funny. It was supposed to be like really, really harmful. But Eric Kripke then said it was supposed to be funny.
He's been on record as saying he didn't see the situation as sexual assault or any type of sexual violence.
And again, I understand probably what's going to happen. And this is like the most cynical thing that I could say is that he may be looking for like a response like this, but like, I am very willing to fight against discourse that could possibly promote the kind of like yada-yada-ing of men being SA'd.
He saw the situation as being funny and played for laughs.
That's not what he said. Again, we've already addressed this. After this, he kind of just goes into issues that, you know, he had.
See the situation as sexual assault or any type of sexual violence. He saw the situation as being funny and played for laughs.
I love, wait, did he just like hand wave my evidence on screen?
That's not what he said. Again, we've already.
Yo, this is okay. So I'm thinking maybe when editing this, like didn't realize what he was going to put here because I just show on screen like Eric Kripke saying it was supposed to be hilarious.
He addressed this. After this, he kind of just goes into issues that, you know, he had with the whole episode, which I don't really care for since, you know, I just wanted to use this part of the video since a lot of people were echoing the stuff he was saying in regards to Hughie. I do agree with some parts of it, like the fact that Sage was shot in the head and Homelander saw it and didn't investigate. That was weird for some reason. So I do think the show had problems, but the Hughie stuff is kind of something that a lot of people are just kind of misunderstanding. Allowed to dislike it and everything, but these claims about how the writers were just being edgy for the sake of being edgy and just wanted Hughie traumatized for a laugh, like that's just straight up false. Sexual assault.
That's straight up false, guys. It's straight up false. They didn't want it to be played for laughs. That's straight up false. That was all right then. I'm happy he got the views. I am not bitter enough to not have like want another creator to get views. Again, this guy doesn't seem malicious. He just seems, I'm gonna say, not necessarily educated on like sexual consent or just riding around like SA and even just like, you know, men in sexual situations. So happy he got his bag. But at the same time, I do hope that if he does see this, he can realize like, oh yeah, you know, some of these things weren't great. I don't even see how you respond to my video in such like a critical way because I don't even think I said anything that controversial, but a little bit weird.